Hello, and welcome to Writers Group Therapy.
I'm Tom.
And I'm Roshni. We're writers helping writers with whatever writing ailments you might have.
Whether it's related to your craft or your career, we can help.
Are you ready for your session?
The doctors are in. This week we have with us the award-winning team of Ryan and Kaz Firpo. They're cousins, each of whom have credits for screenwriting and directing, producing, and editing. Kaz was on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list, and together they had a winning Blacklist script, Ruin. And now they have a thriller set up at Netflix with Ridley Scott producing. Wow, these guys are busy. Most recently, they were the screenwriters of Marvel's epic film, The Eternals. Guys, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here. We're glad to talk.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
So just for our listeners, Ryan, which one are you?
Mm-hmm. This is Ryan.
And Kaz?
And this is Kaz.
Awesome.
All right.
So obviously you guys are related, you're cousins, but how did you, quote unquote, meet and get started in doing this? Like, did you grow up together and both love filmmaking, or did you just both decide to move to LA and you lived in different states, or like, how did it all get started?
Yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. Obviously, we're cousins. We grew up together, but more importantly, we grew up like near each other. I think I know a lot of people who like don't know their cousins. For us in particular, we literally grew up in the Bay Area, about 30 minutes apart. So we had family holidays at Christmas. Honestly, we just grew up making movies in like Ryan's backyard. We had like mini DV cameras. I remember when like the iMac finally came out and we could edit in iMovie, and that was like a really formative and kind of exciting time for I think film in general, but certainly for us. And then from there, Ryan and I kind of both approached filmmaking from similar sides, but sort of different aspects of the same coin. Really, I went like the film school route. I knew I always wanted to make movies. I went to NYU Film School. I did 4 years at Tisch and just sort of lived in New York all that time. And really, I graduated college and had this incredible, this is a story I don't tell that often, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. I had a friend of a friend. It was actually my roommate at the time. Had somebody who was like, I will pay you to write a movie. It was like a big budget Amblin movie and that style movie. And we literally locked ourselves in this apartment in Brooklyn, days after graduating film school, and just wrote a movie in 7 weeks, nonstop. It was 7 days a week. We lived and breathed it. But at the end, I was like, I actually really like this movie. This is a fun script. And that project ended up, of course, falling apart, breaking many hearts, and sort of not being the real deal. But what that incredible 5-6 weeks proved to me was if you sit down and you do the work, you can write a movie, and you can write a movie that you actually like. So that was really a formative moment for me where I sort of realized to write a script, all you need is a computer and a great idea and a lot of willpower. So that's, let's say, half my journey, but I'll hand it to Ryan because he had his own very strange journey to Hollywood.
Yeah, I mean, I got into filmmaking when I was a teenager because I was a skateboarder. I was a skate rat that just kind of, growing up in the Bay Area, there was a lot of great places to skate, especially San Francisco. So I would go to San Francisco all the time and just kind of hang out with a bunch of people there. And that's when I got exposed to a lot of pro skaters out there and became aware of the videos that they were doing. And at the time, Spike Jonze was actually making a lot of these skate videos for girl skateboards and chocolate skateboards. So I started watching those and became really enamored with the filmmaking even more than the skateboarding. And that kind of got me interested in being a filmmaker. And so I did go to film school, but only for 1 semester. And I ended up dropping out and making a feature film with my next semester's tuition money, which was about $5,000. And that basically became my film school. And after that, I just started kind of working in the Bay Area in film, mostly as an editor. And my kind of path to making movies, I decided early on was I was going to be an independent filmmaker. I looked at people like Jim Jarmusch and was kind of I want to make movies like that. How does he do it? And then I find out that he had this kind of group of German film investors who basically were bankrolling all his movies. So I was like, I got to find my German investors and they're going to pay for my movies for the rest of my life. And I'll be set. So then at that same time, I was also playing a lot of poker, and I became aware of the online poker world. And there were all these kids who were 18 or 19 years old who were making $1 million a month playing online poker. And I was like, oh my God, this is the greatest untapped resource of independent film financing. And I decided that I was going to just try to kind of penetrate or infiltrate this community and make them befriend me and become my German film investors and finance all my movies. And so over the course of like a year or so, I just started kind of meeting people really through the internet, just through like online forum sites and things like that. And I eventually kind of built up this little crew of these high stakes pros who were all very successful, and a lot of them had interest in movies. And they ended up financing a feature-length documentary about online poker. And while we were filming it, actually, it was supposed to just be like this kind of subculture piece. But while we were filming it, the U.S. government actually shut down online poker in America and basically totally like flipped the whole industry on its head. And so then the movie became much bigger, and that was about like a 3-year project that I produced, directed, and edited. And that was my first experience just like raising money, because the budget it was financed entirely from online poker winnings from all these professional poker kids, basically. And they just basically gave me the money and were just like, there was no oversight. They were just kind of like, okay, go make your movie now. And so that was my first experience, just like making a real independent film and then releasing it and having strangers watch it. And it was a really good experience, but it was also really grueling. And I was like, man, that took a really long time. And that was really hard. And then around that same time, Kaz kind of approached me about writing a movie together. Because growing up, we had always had this kind of unofficial collaboration where we'd share stories, make movies together, and just kind of we're always kind of jamming all things story and film, but we'd never actually done something together. And so he had the idea of like, let's write an independent film, and you could raise some money, I'll raise some money, and we'll go make it. And that script ended up being Ruin, which, as you said earlier, won the Blacklist in 2017.
Wow, that is amazing. And I love that you literally took a gamble on your career. That is so cool. Now,
Yes.
if I heard right, Ryan, you said you went to school in San Francisco?
Yeah,
Did
I went to
Okay.
the Academy of Art College or University. The Academy, I don't even remember what it's called. The Academy of Art in San Francisco.
Some school.
Yeah,
So
no,
Yeah,
it is an
you
art
were
school.
okay. So you were on different coasts, but you decided to
yeah,
work together on this movie.
Yeah, well, I
yeah.
just got out of film school, and basically I went right into commercials and documentaries. So, like, I
Okay.
was Ryan and I said this before. We've done just about every job on a movie set. I've gripped bowling commercials for $25 a day in New York City. I could do location sound. I've done the PA work. So, like, we've done a lot of jobs, and we just love filmmaking. But what we really really love is storytelling. And I think that's a skill that'll be valuable and useful to you no matter what job you have. If you're a CEO or a screenwriter, or if you're just working, at a restaurant, being able to tell a captivating story and really like organize things in narrative is infinitely useful. And for me, I really honed a lot of those skills working documentary, in sort of conflict zones around the world after it was during the middle of the European refugee crisis. It was something that is still happening to this day, but I basically went and made a series of documentaries about that and sort of the relationships I made in Jamaica and Syria and Central America with UNICEF is actually how we sort of found our way to Hollywood. I always joke I want to start a podcast where we interview people just how you got here, because the stories are so crazy, because there isn't some like job you can definitely get that's going to get you into the room. We didn't have an uncle we could call. We didn't have agents or managers or any really relationships here. And what happened was, yeah, Ryan was living in Los Angeles at the time, and I was working in New York, and we had this idea for a film. And the big thing was, we've been making professionally working in film for years, but we sort of hadn't made that movie. And that's really what I always tell people: is you're one good thing away from being what you want to be. You're one good screenplay from being a great screenwriter. You're one good commercial from being a commercial director, one documentary away from being a documentarian. And that's really what we set out to do. And when you say take a gamble, I mean, that's really defined most of my career, is that you just take a chance on yourself. You have to believe, that you can do it. And I'll just say, we put ourselves through school, and you take those chances and saying, like, I am going to, take that time off and write that screenplay and eat ramen for 2 months, and during that time, you'll come out of it with something you hope is special. And so Ruin, just briefly, for those who don't know, It's the story of a former SS officer, like an ex-Nazi, 6 months after the end of World War II, who's determined to atone for his crimes during the war by hunting down and killing all the members of his old unit. And along the way, he meets the survivor of one of his camps, Elsa, who's the only one who knows where his commanding officer is hiding. So he has no choice but to take her along on this sort of journey of revenge. It's really a Western in post-war Europe. It's kind of how we've always thought about it, how we've always described it. And the original idea was to just make it for, $500,000 in the Czech Republic with 2 actors in the woods. And the script is available online, I think, because of the blacklist. But if you dig into it, you'll sort of see deep down, we really tried to make a movie that was mostly just 2 people, grappling with these very large, very heavy ideas. That's what I had just come from spending a month in refugee camps in Greece. And it was something that was really in my mind and in my imagination, was sort of the way that generations collectively heal from trauma, the way that they deal with trauma, and sort of migration. One of the largest migration movements in human history was after World War II. Mm-hmm. And so we were living through that second event, during the refugee crisis. And so I think that colored a huge part of what this movie was about and trying to say. And I think one of the magic ingredients of that project was we didn't have that Hollywood voice in the back of our head saying, "Oh, you have to sell this, and what's your audience, and who's going to finance this film." It was like, no, we're going to go make it for no money, and it just needs to be good. It doesn't need to be marketable, and that was, I think, this X factor that allowed us to write something I like to think is very special.
Nice. And because you were bi-coastal as a team, how did you guys decide, let's do LA over New York? I mean, obviously, Kaz, you already had, connections in New York. So how did you decide, well, let's leave this place and go to the West Coast where we don't have,
Well, I will say this briefly, and then I'll hand it to Ryan because he's got a great story about how he wrote this thing. But I was in New York for about a decade. And had I had a company out there that I was running, and I was working commercials, and I love New York, but also ultimately we are Californians. And very specifically for this project, we just wanted to go somewhere where we could just focus on the writing. I'd had a lot of success using that method before. And so we essentially went to a family cabin in the woods up in Northern California. I mean, it was like 2-bedroom, had a beautiful deck. There were literally no neighbors. It was just like on a hill in the woods. And we went and just bought like groceries for 2 weeks, a dozen DVDs for movies that were like this, spiritually like this, connected to this, and we just lived in the universe. So for Ryan and I, it was really our first time collaborating, but we'd had this unofficial collaboration where I'd always been sending him scripts and outlines, and he's been giving me notes, and I'd read, half a dozen of his screenplays over the years that I loved. And that's where this whole process began, is Ryan was just the best screenwriter that I knew, and I also just happened to be related to him. So we went off into the woods to write this movie, and this is the only place we could find where we could stay for free for 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really ideal scenario. Like Kaz said, we're totally siloed off, and there was nothing else besides the script. It was just, we would eat when we were hungry, and sleep when we were tired. But besides that, it was just working on the movie, and we were just incredibly focused. And a really kind of strange anecdote is that cabin, we ended up visiting it about 2 or 3 times. We would do these little sprints, basically 10 to 14 days at the cabin. And we wrote Ruin there, and then we wrote a portion of Mimi from Rio, which is our script at Netflix that you were talking about in the opening. And then kind of shortly after Ruin really found success and kind of really changed our lives, the cabin actually burned down in the Napa fires. So it was really strange because we felt like it was some kind of weird kind of sacrifice to the film gods, basically. That we got our Hollywood career, but we lost our magical writing portal.
Yeah. It wasn't within days or weeks. It was there was a literal moment in time where I'm on the phone with our managers, and they're literally Gal Gadot is attached to star in your first feature right after Wonder Woman. Wow. And then Ryan's literally on the phone next to me in the car, and his dad calls and says, "It's gone. It burned down." So it was really a crazy moment. But yes, I think at the end of the day, I have only positive and hopeful memories. And now we're going to steer this conversation somewhere optimistic and hopeful.
Yeah, let's do that. So, your films so far, obviously, you had a background in documentary filmmaking, Kaz, but then this the Ruin, was kind of based on historical events, but it's a narrative actually. How did that transition happen? And then obviously transitioning into getting a deal with Marvel to write something so epic based on existing IP. How did that kind of transition happen?
Yeah, and I think that all people, I was saying this earlier, we're storytellers, and that's, I think, the ultimate sort of lesson in documentaries. It's an incredible way, and Ryan will say it too, to learn narrative, because what you're really doing is you're going out there and you have your eyes open to the story, and then you come back and you sit in the editing room and you're forced to say, okay, what is this movie? What am I trying to say? What are the themes? Who are the characters? And you really have to shape the film, and in a way, write the film in the editing room. And so that's an incredibly valuable way to really take into practice all these narrative tricks and tips and things you learn through 4 years of film school and feature writing and writing movies. And that's just one thing I'll say briefly, because I feel pretty strongly about it. Screenwriting is one of those weird jobs where everyone's seen so many movies in their lives that they think they can just pick up a pen or open a word processor and write a perfect movie on the first try. But it's just because I've been using lights in my house all my life doesn't mean I think I can do all the electrical wiring in my home. You have to fail. You have to learn. You have to fail to succeed. And I think that's a really important lesson, is that a lot of people set out and they try to write a movie, and it's very hard. I'll say it, every movie is hard. It never gets easier. But you start it, and when you write something and you finish it, it just gives you that little extra step, in your personal process to know that you can do it. And I think that's a big an important lesson, is failing to succeed exists in every industry, and you play a sport, you're not Cristiano Ronaldo the first time you kick a ball. So I think that's an important lesson that I would sort of say. And for us, our journey was really fascinating. Briefly, it all was connected to documentaries. I was shooting a documentary for UNICEF in Jamaica. Ryan and I had written this script, spec'd it, I guess you would say, and we had it sitting on a hard drive, and we were very proud of it, but we were sort of in between. We were trying to figure out, okay, how can we raise money, and how can we go to Europe and shoot this thing in the Czech Republic? I'm a French citizen. Our dads are French. We have a lot of connection to World War II, which is sort of where this story came from. We're Americans because our grandparents fled the Nazis. That's why we're here. So this story was very personal to us. It was always connected to us. And then this producer in Jamaica who wanted to introduce me to her sister's fiance. And this is a true story. It's really, truly that tenuous. And that person ended up being Sam Warren, who became our manager and changed our lives. He really we got on the phone, we hit it off. He was our age. He read the scripts. He called me, said, when can you be in LA? And it really was sort of that magical Hollywood story. And he loaded Ruin, this script into a shotgun basically, and blasted it out over all of Hollywood. And it he set up 75 meetings for us over the course of 6 weeks. We met, everywhere from Focus Features and A24 to the studios. It was really a magical time period, because that was when, I'm going to be a little nostalgic here, that was when all the studios were open and all these meetings were in person, and you had to drive onto the lot. And, Ryan and I, we love movies as much as we love Hollywood, and I think that sort of mythos of driving on to Paramount's lot, when you watch these 10 knights in shining armor, smoking cigarettes outside the studio, and then the bell rings, they have to go and shoot their movie. That's real. It's all happening. It feels so Hollywood. It was really a very special time. And then during all that, one of those many meetings, we sat down with the incredible Nate Moore over at Marvel Studios. And it was very casual. He was working on a little movie at the time called Black Panther that no one had ever heard of. And we just really hit it off. And we talked about, gods and mythology. And just by way of example, I studied classics and archaeology in college. That was something I really loved. It was a big passion of mine. I spent 4 months working on an archaeological dig in Egypt in my senior year. It was just something that I think that ancient storytelling, I've always felt this way, and I think it's found its way to the biggest possible screen, was that sort of the stories we've been telling about superheroes now are the same stories we've been telling about gods and heroes for thousands of years. And so when I studied the classics and I was looking at, everything from Ovid's Metamorphoses to just Homer's, Odyssey, what you were really learning about is the stories about gods being sort of human and fallible makes it just a little bit easier to be us, to be mortal. And so that was sort of the conversation that came up when we were talking to Marvel. And it took about 6 months, but after we sold that script to Netflix, we've been working on rewrites, we'd sort of been getting our bearings in Hollywood. Nate came back, he called us and he said, hey, I have this crazy project, would you like to come in and pitch for it? I'll let Ryan tell that part.
Yeah. As far as pitching, yeah. So when we came in to talk about Eternals, we sat down and, like many other people, we had never heard of Eternals before, and so, but Nate started kind of telling us about the property, and then within a few minutes, we just knew that this was a movie that we just had to make. There was just like so much crossover with our own personal interests and with things that were already exploring in our own work, and so it really from the beginning became this like holy grail project that we were like, we just have to win this thing. And it's like, obviously, yes, like anybody wants to write a Marvel movie, or I don't know, maybe I'm sure there are people who don't, but basically, Marvel is a big prize to win if you're a writer in this business. But beyond just being a Marvel movie, this movie specifically, just almost thinking about it like an original piece of IP that's not even connected to the MCU. It was just a really fascinating and amazing story opportunity. So we were really, really hyped on it from the beginning. And then the process became, they gave us this like 700-page document that just had all the Eternals runs and just a bunch of bios about all these different characters, like 40 plus Eternals, and just like everything you could possibly gather from that existed in the MCU about Eternals was all in this packet. And they basically were just like, so look at all this stuff and come up with a movie. And so we took about 3 weeks to kind of come up with a pitch, and then we went back in and we basically practice pitched that to Nate and to this executive over at Marvel, Zoe Nagelhout, and who kind of shepherded the project throughout the whole process. And anyway, we did about like 2 or 3 practice pitches with Nate and Zoe, and they kind of helped us, gave us notes, helped us refine it a little bit, and then we went and pitched Kevin and Lou. And that was a really intense pitch. We were like in the Iron Man room, which is like this big giant room with a huge conference table, and there's all these Iron Man like artwork all over the place, like Tony Stark just kind of looking over your shoulder the whole time, saying like, "Don't mess up." For about 90 minutes, we just told the whole story of the movie, and the whole time, Kevin and Lou were just kind of sitting there, totally poker faced, and we really had no idea like which way that they were leaning. And even when the meeting concluded, like I still didn't have a good sense of where they were. But as they walked out, Kevin was like, "Hey, where do you guys live?" Which we thought was like a weird question, but we had kind of the perfect answer, because I was like, "I live in Altadena, and Kaz lives in West Hollywood, so Burbank and the Marvel Studios is kind of right in the middle." And so he seemed really satisfied with that. And then and then a few days later, we got the call from our agents telling us that we got the Marvel job. And it's really,
That's
the call that changed our
amazing.
lives. Yeah.
Yeah, I was reading about the writing of it, and producer Nate Moore you mentioned, and director Chloe Zhao both also had writing credits. At what point did they get involved in the writing, and were you involved in the rewrites and stuff? Because I guess they said they wanted to change supporting characters and races and genders and stuff like that. Was that something you went in with originally, or is that something that they had to add later?
Yeah, I think that's
Well,
a
just,
broad question, because for maximum clarity, Nate
yeah.
does not have a writing credit. Rarely do producers get writing credits and through the WGA, and especially in Hollywood, it'd be very tumultuous. But we love Nate. He was there for every aspect of the writing process, but he would be the first to tell you he's not a writer. I think you may be thinking of Patrick Burley, who is fantastic and is
Yes.
a very talented
Patrick,
who works sort of in the Marvel system, let's say. So the process was, we wrote about, since we're just getting right into it, we wrote about 4 drafts before they hired Chloe. So we basically came on board and we were working with Nate and Zoe, the team there. And, it really is as lo-fi as you think it would be. It's really a process of like writing down ideas on note cards and sticking them up on a piece of, cardboard in order. So that's really where the story breaking begins. You sit around, you come up with ideas. We had already essentially broken the structure of an entire movie, and we started to adapt that structure more or less over the course of a month with just the production executives. So we wrote, 2 complete 196-page first drafts, and then we got notes on that. We went back and forth, and so there's a whole process where, you're just writing the movie basically. And then from that first draft, we had about 8 drafts of the outline, which is like 35 pages, and we did that 8 times. And then from that, the conversation about directors began. so we started watching other people's movies and talking about who that could be. And Nate had a great short list, and we started to watch The Writer and songs my brother taught me, and it became very obvious that Chloe was just the choice. And so when she was hired, and we found out her pitch was like so bizarrely similar to ours, we just saw the movie the same way. It really was like a culture match right away. And even more so, Chloe went to NYU grad school while I was actually at undergrad at NYU. And we had a ton of mutual friends. It was a very small world. Chloe's co-producer of Nomadland actually produced my thesis film at NYU. Like, that's how small the universe was. And so when she came in, we actually wrote another handful of drafts with Chloe as a director, and us, writing that draft with her notes and making changes. And we ended up doing, I don't know, about 9 probably total. And then they went basically off to London to start production. And when that process began, that's when Chloe took over and sort of began putting her writer-director stamp on the film.
Cool. That's cool. It's like great how you got to work with her so closely on that. This is something that I have a problem with because in my writing, and I've had people ask me to write some things that had to do with gender issues, writing from a female perspective. As a straight white male, I feel more so even these days, a little apprehensive about it because I don't want to ever come off as tone deaf, like, because I don't understand it from, actually being any of those things. So how did you guys approach that, or how was that handled in the writing room?
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Ryan speak to this in his own way, but this is my feeling. Storytelling is storytelling. There isn't you don't have the right to not tell someone else's story or tell another person's story just because you are not that thing. I'm not an immortal space god, for instance, but I know, that they deal and dream and want the same things that humans want. And so I think it's really important that it always comes down to respect. It always comes down to you're trying to come from a place of honesty and humanity. And it's not about, okay, well, just because I'm not, Thor from this foreign planet, I can't write Thor's story. And so Eternals, it was not some mandate from Disney that it should be this incredibly diverse film. That was something that we felt just so strongly about from the first second we pitched this movie, because the Eternals are really a reflection of humanity. They're a reflection of all the people on Earth. So there had to be young ones, old ones, people from all over the world. It's just an incredibly diverse team. And ultimately, they are space aliens. They're not people. So I think that's just an important consideration. And when we set out to write this movie, I'm half Japanese, I'm half French. I was raised by 2 women. It's not an accident that we have the first gay character and the first gay love story. And it's very tasteful. It's very nuanced, and it's very human in this movie. Just the same way, we have an extremely diverse cast of really interesting and talented actors. For us right away, we always knew that, we wanted to have Ajax be a woman and be a strong matriarch, and to have that sort of perspective of an older and wiser leader, which is something we hadn't spent a lot of time exploring in the MCU and hadn't seen before. And so when we were in that writing room, even in the early days before there was a filmmaker, we were really talking with Nate about, we really think that this is Selma Hayek. We think this could be Angelina Jolie. We think this could be, this has to be Kumail Nanjiani. Only he could play, Kingo. He has that timing. So we wrote a lot of these roles with people in mind. And obviously, if you're Marvel immediately following Infinity War, there's an incredible opportunity to cast really interesting, fascinating, and fresh faces. So, if you want to get granular about your question, I really think that it always comes down to doing your research, having respect for the roles you're writing, and trying to come from a place of honesty. And I think that at the end of the day, anyone should be able to tell anyone's story as long as it comes from a place, again, of really mutual respect and understanding.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, in general, writers tend to be more empathetic people and have like a high emotional IQ and have an ability to kind of put themselves into another person's mind and feelings and sort of determine how they would react in certain situations. So, like I have a pretty diverse group of friends who have lots of different points of view. So whenever I'm writing something that writing a character who is not exactly like me, I try to think about my friends who are like them, or maybe other characters and other stories that I've read who are like them, or just like Kaz said, just looking at the research and just try to flex that empathy muscle and try to imagine how they would feel and what they would say and how they would react to certain situations. But I definitely, yeah, I mean, I think Kaz has said it before, is that, the things that make us different are the things that make us unique. And I think, we're a collection of unique individuals, but we're all the same when it comes down to it, and that's a message that you'll see in Eternals, but that also goes to answer your question that there are obviously nuances between different people and different ways of thinking, ways of being. But when it comes down to it, all humans kind of operate on a very similar level and want and need the same things. And so you just try to tap into that, and you'll generally find the truth.
And what I would add to that, just from my days in documentary, is saying I used to have that I really like, and I still stand by, is that we all laugh the same way. That's just, if you want any proof that human beings are one species, there's your proof.
Well, speaking of writing pressure, how did you guys handle writing something that was already an existing IP? Even though I know you mentioned the Eternals wasn't as well known as like other Marvel properties, still you're working with something that people are aware of, so you have to be cognizant of that. How did you guys handle that pressure?
Yeah, I think anytime you write something knowing there's going to be an audience, which is, I would think, as a writer, you hope is every time you write something, you're conscious of what people expect and what people, audiences might want. But at the end of the day, you can only write the story that you want to tell, because you can't sit there and second guess and say, oh, I hope they're going to like this part. And I really think this is going to be confusing. So, you have to sit there and do the work for you and fall in love with the story and chase the things that you're interested in about that story. That's where these stories, that's my advice always. Don't sit there and try to make other people happy when you're sitting in the writing room. It will not reward you. It's not going to be a process that will consistently help. You have to be aware of it. At the end of the day, billions, if we're lucky, billions of people will see your stories, as a filmmaker. But at the end of the day, you have to be telling stories for yourself, because that's when they become true. There's a saying in acting, the more personal, the more universal. I feel very strongly about that. When you can tap into something that's really, again, we use the word truth, and we're talking about that a lot today. When you tap into something that's true to you, other people find themselves and see themselves in it.
Yeah, and there's another adage in Hollywood that says, "Don't impress me, convince me," because we're trying to basically suspend your disbelief. That's the whole point of stories, is to try to basically make you believe something that's made up is real. And so people tend to reject things and tend to reject stories when their BS detectors go off. So it's all about finding the truth of the story, which generally means the truth of your truth. And if you're channeling that in, then it's hard for people not to connect with that story.
Cool. As a writing team, we have had several writing teams on the show before. We always like to ask, how do you guys work together? Do you each have strengths in the writing? Is one of you better at characters, one better at action, that kind of thing? And
on a granular level, I'll start there because I think it's kind of a funny way to talk about it, but then we'll get out to the big existential stuff. There's just some great software that we use. A lot of that collaboration started there. It's called Writer Duet, and essentially it's just Google Docs for scripts. It literally lets you work on the same sentence and rewrite each other and see what the other person is doing simultaneously. So we've been using that software since our very first collaboration, and that sort of has informed the process in many ways. But yeah, absolutely. Anytime there's a partnership, you have strengths and you have weaknesses, and I think the best partnerships understand that, and they help each other thrive. And so for me, I'm very much like a mythological storyteller. I look at the world, I look at the themes and sort of these big ideas that are very useful when you're talking about a movie, but very difficult when you're writing it. And so I start sort of outside in, and Ryan is just the best character writer that I know. And he very much comes from a place of psychology and emotion and really breathing life into the conflicts of the story. And so we sort of try to meet in the middle. And I certainly think that I've become a better writer working with him. And I like to think he's become a better writer working with me. And that is sort of how we always talk about it. I'm sort of the external conflict writer, and he's the internal conflict writer. And that's sort of where you get this marriage of genre and character, and movies like Ruin or Mimi from Rio. And just for context, Mimi from Rio is about two brothers in near future Brazil smuggling the world's first android out of the walled city of Rio. And it's like District 9 meets, Children of Men. And so we have these big sort of ambitious movies. I mean, Eternals is maybe one of the most ambitious movies ever made in Hollywood. Immortal Space, the saga of the Eternals, immortal space aliens who've watched over mankind for 7,000 years. That's the kind of stuff that we were pitching, these epic love stories. And so we really try to marry the epic and the intimate. And I think that's a big part of our process, certainly as writers.
Cool. Yeah, that I love that District 9 and the robot Children of Men story. That sounds really cool. Really out there. So
what are you guys working on next, and how can people find you?
We appreciate that question. We right now, during the last year and change, we've been very grateful to be busy. We wrote a very exciting globe-trotting adventure movie for Netflix called Prodigy, which is based on the Mark Millar comics of the same name. But most importantly, I would say we also spent the pandemic writing my debut feature as a director, which Ryan is producing and writing. And so for us, a lot of this journey began because we wanted to make a movie. And candidly, Ruin was really a script that we wrote for me to direct for, again, $500,000 in the Czech Republic. And now, the last year, we've been developing a script called The Motor City Girls, which is about 5 teenage sisters in sort of a mythical Detroit in the 1990s who are imbued with strange and dangerous powers. And they're sort of on this supernatural detective story to find and dismantle the cult their father started, decades earlier, which is sort of the reason why they have their powers. It's really like a supernatural mystery. It's a work of American magical realism. And, for us, it's really the launching of a franchise that really reflects the way we see the world and sort of the uncanny aspects of American civilization. It's really a story that we've been working on for a long time. We're literally in the process of putting it together with the incredible Stacey Scher right now as a producer. And for us, we're also really interested in TV. We have 2 shows that we're pitching right now over the next few weeks. And so we just hope that we get to tell a lot of stories, over the next few months. We have a project that we've been working on for a long time that we really love. It's sort of a mashup of the fantasy genre with a detective story. Maybe if you're finding something in our work that we're interested in, it's often about truth and sort of the discovery of it. And that's a story that we're working with Peter Safran on, the producer of The Suicide Squad. So we have a lot of projects. We're trying to start some worlds and create some universes. That's something we really feel passionately about. But that said, we love writing scripts as much as we love directing stories, And so for us, it's really a part of building a career that we're proud of, telling stories we're proud of. And I think this is something I would say to writers who are listening, and it's shockingly important, is that working with people you like is about one of the most valuable things you can do. I think it's really important that at the end of the day, you get notes from a place of respect and you like the producers or the co-writers or the executives you're working with. And to chase projects with that in mind is shockingly valuable for the long term, not just for the enjoyment of what you're doing, but also, you have to enjoy this ride. You only get to do it once.
I was just going to say that. Yeah, if you want to see our ride, you can follow me on Instagram at ryan.firpo.
That was a beautiful plug. Yes, I also exist on the internet. We're sort of against Twitter these days, although I don't know if I'm allowed to just destroy Twitter, but I feel like it's the meanest place on the internet. So we don't have Twitter, but we are on Instagram. We're both photographers. We spend a lot of time traveling and documenting the world around us. And I'm Kaz Firpo, so KazFirpo. We exist. We're out there.
That's awesome. Best of luck to you both. Guys, check them out. Ryan and Kaz Firpo, check out The Eternals, now in theaters. And thank you guys so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.